Some time ago, we set sail from Fort Lauderdale. Our destination was Lagos, Portugal. The estimated trip time was about 3 to 4 weeks, assuming everything went smoothly. My wife, Hannah, and I spent several months prior to the trip learning how to sail. We had the time and money to pack up and go, and we always wanted to see Lagos. So we decided it was time to put our new skill and sailboat to good use. The first week was exciting. There's a sense of freedom that comes with sailing the open seas, which is funny considering we spent most of our time confined to a 30-foot space. But as we looked out into the seemingly endless waters, we couldn't help but feel like we'd left the world behind and entered a new one. Like all our expectations and worries were stored in a separate reality. Despite the feeling of liberation, there were still a few bumps that first week. The wind wasn't as much of a team player as we initially hoped, and the water got a little rough at times, but we managed. By the second week, we were sailing into the middle of the North Atlantic, roughly halfway between Fort Lauderdale and Lagos. That first morning of the new week, I'd gotten out of bed just before sunrise, made a cup of coffee, and climbed above deck. That was my morning routine. The water was flat and there wasn't any wind. It was foggy out. As we floated forward a bit, the sun beginning to rise, I could see a dark object sticking out of the water. Initially, I thought it was a capsized boat. It was somewhat rounded like the underside of a hull. I quickly woke up Hannah and told her to grab some vests and the first aid kit. But as we got closer, I could see that it wasn't a boat. It was a massive rock. Hannah appeared on deck with the rescue gear in hand, a puzzled look on her face as she asked, "Wait, there's people on that rock?" I thought it was a boat. I was just as confused as her. Why was there a rock in the middle of the ocean? It's supposed to be thousands of feet deep right there. I carefully steered the ship alongside it and shut off the motor. The rock didn't stick out of the water much. I was able to jump from the sailboat onto its surface without an issue. However, the surface area itself was very large, over 5 times that of the boat. "You think it's some sort of underwater mountain?" Hannah asked from the boat. I was walking along the surface. "Maybe we should go under and look." "I'll grab the goggles." Hannah hurried below deck. She loved the water. We both did. Any reason to throw some goggles on and explore. She was game. She appeared back on deck, wearing goggles, a snorkel, and a swimsuit. She lowered the rear ladder and jumped in. I shook my head and smiled. I loved how energetic and curious she always was. She laid face down along the surface of the water, snorkel sticking up for air. I explored further along the top of the rock while she swam around. Then I stopped. There were markings. I knelt down for a closer look. These were man-made, symbols of some sort, like a language. It looked almost like ruins. I reached down to touch one of the engravings, when Hannah suddenly poked her head out of the water. "You have to see this," she said. "Hannah, there's markings on this rock. There's markings on the side of it as well." "The side?" "Yeah, it's like a giant tower." "What do you mean?" "It's a big cylinder." "How far does it go down?" Hannah shrugged. "It's too dark to tell. I think it goes all the way to the bottom." I looked back at the rock below my feet. What the hell was this thing? Why hadn't we ever heard about it? Who made these marks? Has anyone else sailed past this giant rock without noticing it? Come up here, I said. Hannah swam to the boat and climbed up the ladder. Those markings look ancient, she said as she took off the snorkel and goggles and tossed them aside. I knelt back down and rubbed my fingers across one. It began to glow an orangish color. What the fuck? I said as I quickly stood back up. Hannah was about to jump onto the rock. What? Stay there, I said, holding my hand up for her to stop. Why? It's glowing. What is? Suddenly the rock began to vibrate. Nate? Hannah said, panicked. What's going on? I began to stumble back towards the boat, fearing the worst. Then a rectangle opening appeared towards the edge of the rock. The vibrating abruptly stopped. We were both speechless. I hesitated a moment and then slowly approached the opening. Nate, don't, said Hannah. I just want to look real quick. I don't like this. That should have been my first hint. As curious and adventurous as Hannah was, but I couldn't resist taking at least a quick peek. I leaned over the opening and looked inside. There's stairs, I said. Nate, come back. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the opening. I could see the stone stairs descended in a wide spiral. Toss me a flashlight, I hollered to Hannah. Nate, just do it, I snapped at her. She huffed and went below deck. I hate that I raised my voice at her. I hardly ever do. But this was too incredible. It could be the biggest discovery in centuries. Maybe ever. She returned to the deck and tossed me the light. I turned it on and leaned into the stairwell, trying to see as much as I could. I climbed down a step, not thinking. My curiosity was steering me. Another step. Nate? I heard her call my name, but continued anyways. Another step. Nate, stop. Another step. And then another. And then the rock began to shake again. The opening was sealing shut. I hurried back towards the top. Hannah cried out my name. That was the last time I heard from her. It closed before I could get out. Hannah? I yelled for her. Hannah! No answer. Touch the center mark. Still no response. I stood at the top of the stairs for several minutes, listening for her. For any sign that she was trying to get me out, but could not hear anything. I didn't want to leave, in case Hannah was able to figure out how to open the door. But my curiosity was still there. I shined the light down the stairs. I took a deep breath and descended. Soon the darkness faded as the stairwell opened up to a large cylindrical room. Light flickered from a flame-lit chandelier made of what appeared to be iron. Its design looked medieval, maybe older. In the center of the room was a large wooden lectern. I carefully moved over to it and looked. Symbols similar to those I'd seen on the rock were handwritten on the pages. I touched the pages, old and worn. I felt like turning a page would cause it to crumble. Suddenly, as if in response to my touch, the writing began to change. The words shifted and faded around the page until they were in English. He awaits upon his throne of blood and bone, within the tower of ancient stone. I backed away from the book. My curiosity had waned and fear was now coursing through me. I needed to get out. I was confident that what awaited me was something sinister, something evil. I began to feel its presence in the air. Then, as if on cue, it spoke to me. A whisper, like a passing wind, said, "Come to me." I did not move, nor could I gather the words to speak. My heart was drumming rapidly inside my chest. I anxiously glanced overhead once more. Why hadn't Hannah figured out how to open the door yet? She was no dummy. She saw where I'd been standing when the rock began to vibrate. She heard me say the mark was glowing. So, why was I still trapped inside? Then the thought occurred to me. Maybe the door wouldn't open for her. Maybe going down was my only option. I stepped over to the winding stone stairs and peered down. Hannah had said the tower looked as if it had continued all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Thousands of feet. I wondered how much of that I would have to walk. How long would it take? And what awaited me below? I took a moment to steady my breath and continued my descent. When I was a teenager, me and my friends used to play a lot of dare games. My hometown is a small suburban, great for young families or old people, but acknowledgingly dull for teens. So, as you can imagine, we had a tendency to take things too far. My friend Tom almost got hit by a train when Sophie dared him to dash across the tracks. Jess was sick for weeks after drinking some stagnant pond water we found in the woods. Our competitive spirit was stronger than any sense of self-preservation, and each time we cheated death, we were only driven to try something even more stupid. This is going to sound weird, but one game we like to play involves stalking random strangers around town. We would pick a random person from the crowds in the high street and follow them as they went about their day. Sometimes we'd catch them doing something weird or borderline criminal, but most did no more than visit a few shops before getting on a bus home. The fun was mainly in the danger of getting caught. We never did though. In fact, we were starting to get bored of it by the time the story I'm about to share took place. We always followed at a safe distance, making up funny stories about the clueless victim's life and personality. I mean, really, how often do you turn around to check if anyone's following you? You'd never think to, right? One day, it was just me and Jess hanging out in town. She suggested we play, and I reluctantly agreed. I told her to choose our target. She looked around, then smirked as her eyes fell on the perfect candidate. Let's follow old Megs. What? No, that didn't feel right, even though none of our targets ever discovered what we were doing. We had an unspoken agreement not to follow anyone, I don't know, vulnerable. We'd seen this man around town plenty of times, just stop still and staring into space, or aggressively rattling a door handle a minute before a shop opened up for the day. Definitely mentally ill. In a small town, you tend to see the same people around the street, and boredom brings out the worst in people. All the local drunks and unchecked ill had dumb nicknames that all the locals used, so typically cruel. He was called Megs because he looked like a maggot. He had a face that made you double take, then look away embarrassed. I never could tell if he was deformed by some genetic condition or just incredibly ugly. He was right on the border between ordinary unfortunate and categorically wrong. His whole head looked stretched out. His beady little eyes were 2 hand-widths above his thin mouth. His thin cranium towered way too high, and his skin was an unhealthy gray-white. When Jess suggested I was scared of him, I was. I felt I had no choice but to agree to target him. We followed him for a few hours, while he drifted around the town, stopping and staring, then moving on suddenly, as if he remembered he had to be somewhere, only to halt on another street. He entered a supermarket, made a loop of the aisles, then left again. At one point, he cursed and tried to kick an unsuspecting pigeon, which made Jess laugh. I couldn't see what was funny about it. His actions were meaningless. It was all quite sad, really. Finally, he started walking away from the center. "He's going home," said Jess. "I wonder where he lives." "I hope he doesn't live alone," I said. She ignored me. We followed him down a tree-lined road, past Old Terrace townhouses. I was somewhat satisfied to learn he lived in a posh area. We kept a distance of around 50 meters, as the roads were so long and straight. There was no risk of us losing him. "Oh shit," said Jess, as we watched him turn and walk up a garden path. "We got him." We kept walking, moving closer as he came up to the door. I remember a weird thudding as we approached. I couldn't decide if it was the vibration in the ground or the blood in my temples. Just didn't seem to react, so I suspected an oncoming migraine. Megs was holding a slip of paper, a missed delivery notice. As it happened, the postman was still within view, far ahead down the road. Clearly, he had noticed, because as we closed the distance and came within 10 meters of the house, he dashed back down his garden path and down the road to catch up with her. As I looked at the front door he'd left open, my head throbbed painfully. We stopped outside the house and I knew what was coming. "I dare you to go inside." "Piss off, Jess. That postwoman's miles away. You've got at least 5 minutes. Go in for 1 minute, see what kind of hellhole Meg lives in, and you're in the lead. It's enough for you to overtake Sophie in the scoreboard." That made me pause. Sophie's lead had been untouchable since she had flashed her tits at one of our school teachers. We all knew it would take something wild to get back in the running. I was young and stupid. I turned my mind off, walked confidently up the path, and slipped inside. The hallway air was heavy, with a light smell of pain. The absolute silence quickly settled my doubts. No one else lived here. It was an oppressive silence, without even a clock ticking, or electronics humming, but the interior was mundane. There were discharged envelopes on a side table. The walls were conventional off-white. The staircase had a decorative hardwood banister, leading up to... Okay, there was the first strange thing. The top of the staircase was completely blocked off. The gap was stuffed with fabrics, bed sheets, cushions, clothing, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. It was jammed so densely, even air couldn't pass between the floors. I knew Megs wasn't right in the head. What could have possessed him to do this? I have no idea. The hallway to the right of the staircase ended in a door. There was another door in the wall right of that. The far door was ajar, and as I moved closer, a cool draught told me there was an open window somewhere within. In fact, the air was restless, in a way that didn't match the narrow room. I wish I'd had the sense to leave then. It'd been long enough to complete the dare, but I crept on through the far door. The next room was pitch black. There was a chalky smell, and my steps echoed strangely at the doorway. I couldn't find a light switch, so I waited for my eyes to adjust. When they did, I felt sick with vertigo. I was standing on a ledge, just beyond the doorway. The floor stopped and a deep pit yawned before me. I took in the details. Somehow the normality of the room at my level made it stranger. White plaster ceiling, heavy curtains closed over a window. The walls were clean of dust and neatly wallpapered. But then below the baseboard where the floor should be, the world just fell away. Bricks and concrete foundation led down into darkness. How deep did it go? I dug through my pockets and found some loose change. I held a penny out above the dark and let go. It fell, and I waited. I never heard it meet the ground, but as I strained my ears, the pulsing started up again, in my inner ears. My legs started to shake and I clung tight to the door frame, picturing myself falling in, but I didn't move. I was dumbfounded by what I was seeing. The vibrations were messing with my balance. It was like I was affected by a sound, but one too deep to actually hear. My eyes probed the dark for more information. There seemed to be a reddish tone to the blackness. Or maybe there was just too much blood swilling around my sinuses. Then I saw something. 2 points catching the light. Wet, curved, reflective eyes. In the pit, someone was quietly looking back at me. I determined to make out more of the face, but the eyes were all that could reflect light. I don't know how long we stared at each other. I can't imagine what the hell they were doing down there. Looking back, none of it makes sense. It's been years, and I want to dismiss it was a weird dream, but the memory is too vivid. I snapped out of the staring match when my phone started vibrating. Jess was calling me, which could only mean one thing. Old Megs was coming back. I stepped away from the pit and sucked in air as though coming up from underwater. Through the open doorway, on the bright street outside, was Meg Stark, stretched out face. His white forehead was glistening in the sun. It felt like my heart ruptured. There was one more door I hadn't been through. My last hope for escape. My hands trembled around the handle, but I managed to open it quietly and found myself in a living room, just as I heard the old Meg's boots in the hallway. I went to the window, jumping at the sound of the front door slamming. The window opened wide, thank fuck, and I hopped out into the front garden. I didn't look back. I jumped the wall and sprinted away. I clocked Jess sitting at a bus stop on the other side of the road, eyes wide but sensibly staring where she was. To bolt would make her guilty. I ran until I couldn't go any further. Jess had no choice but to ride the bus away from the scene of the crime. She met me back near the center of town. Her expression was grim. We didn't talk about dare game points. She just assured me that I'd been out of sight before she saw old Megs come into his living room. I didn't want to talk about what was in the house, and she didn't push the topic. After this incident, the dare stopped. It was rare to see people on the trail. Most people looked at the steep, unforgiving incline and turned around, leaving it to the regulars. The middle-aged lesbian couple, the old but vigorous man, the kid training for cross-country, and my dog, Bella, and I. When we did see new people attempting it, it was almost like a hazing ritual. We would silently laugh at their struggles and remember how our legs felt the first time we climbed it. The trail was at a terrible slant, a 3-mile walk up a 45-degree angle. After a sharp turn, it eventually came to a gentle downslope, then leveled. If you survived all of that, the path let you in on its secret. After half a mile of flat ground, you took a turn and came to a beautiful little pond. Willow trees surrounded it and birds flew overhead. The air smelled sweet and fresh. It was peaceful and romantic. Bella would swim in the pond and I would lay down on the grass and take a nap. I went every single day. It was my favorite place in the world. On this particular morning, I saw a family of 4 standing beside a van. On the top of the van were bikes. Oh no, I thought to myself. The hill was hard enough to walk, but to pedal up would be nearly impossible, especially since the 2 kids looked younger than 10. Bella barked a greeting and the 2 kids ran up to her smiling. She gave them both a kiss on their cheek. "What are your names?" I asked. "I'm Jamie, and this is my sister Emma. Nice to meet you. I'm Allison. This is Bella." He was about to say more, but their parents called them over. I waved and then continued on with my walk. After about 5 minutes, the family passed me. The kids were doing surprisingly well. In fact, it was the parents who were huffing and puffing. "Hi, Bella," Emma yelled as she rode past. Bella barked a reply. Soon the family was out of sight. I walked for 10 more minutes and then I heard a scream. It was high-pitched and sounded like a little kid. I started to run, fearing that they had missed a turn and gone over the edge of the hill. Bella ran faster and soon she was pulling me up. I felt a pit in the bottom of my stomach. What would be up there waiting for me? Distraught parents? Emma or Jamie? Broken bones or a broken body? When I got to the top, I looked at the downslope and began to laugh. It was the husband. His brakes were screeching and screaming like a little kid as he tried to slow his descent. Jesus Christ, I thought. They need some oil. Eventually I came to the little pond. The dad was playing with Jamie and Emma in the water and the mother was lying in the shade. She smiled at me. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" I said. "Oh yes, it was so pretty today. We just had to go. I'm Allison. Nice to meet you. I'm Lillian. Also, I apologize for that noise you heard. My husband's had that bike for 10 years now, and he's never greased it." I began to laugh. I thought it was one of them screaming. I got so scared. I ran up the hill and prepared to call 911. "Oh no," she laughed. "God, I'm so sorry. I'm going to make Mike fix up that bike first thing tomorrow." Her husband called her over and we parted ways. They seemed like a sweet family. I was glad they didn't turn back at the first sight of the hill. The pond could use some more visitors. I wasn't able to go hiking for a week after that. My boss sent me out of town to meet a high-profile client. By the time I got back, my legs were aching for exercise, and Bella was practically beside herself for it too. We went the next morning, and I saw the family at the entrance again. Soon enough, they passed me. 10 minutes later, I heard the husband's brakes wailing. I guess he forgot. I laughed. When I met them at the pond, the kids came up to me. "We start school next week. We're going to have to make all new friends," Emma said sadly. "Oh, cheer up. You guys will be fine. You're really cool kids and everyone will love you. Besides, you already have 2 friends." I pointed at me and Bella, which sent them into fits of laughter. They started to come every morning, and it became sort of a ritual for us to meet at the pond and talk. Lillian was a high-up sales executive, and Mike was a malpractice lawyer. They had to move because one of the guys Mike and his client were suing was hellbent on retaliation. When he tried to break in and murder the family, Lillian and Mike decided it was time to leave. They changed their names and started new. I told them about my life. I was a graphic designer for a startup. I had lived here my entire life, married once when I was very young, but divorced him after the 3rd affair. One day, I met the lesbian couple as I was going back. Martha and Gilda were their names. "How about that new family with the kids?" I said cheerfully. "Oh yeah, terrible. Such irresponsible parents," Gilda replied. "They are not bad parents. They just try to keep their kids safe." They looked peculiarly at me, then walked on. Mike had put his kids in a lot of danger, but you could hardly blame him. It was his job. I guess some people just weren't that understanding. I didn't see the family all of next week because of school, but on Saturday, I heard the familiar screeching of brakes and smiled. Bella had learned to recognize it too. She associated the high-pitched whine with pets and kisses from the kids. Pavlov conditioning, I supposed. She began to walk faster in anticipation of seeing her best friends, and then cocked her ears. "What is it, Bella?" I laughed. She growled a reply, and then the smell hit us. "Jesus," I said. "What died here?" There were bunnies and ducks, but I had never seen a deer. The only thing big enough to create such a stench. I covered my nose, then started to walk to the pond. I didn't see the family. They must have continued on because of the smell. That's when I saw the bikes. They were mangled and broken and tangled in a heap. The wheels were twisted and the handlebars ripped off. I let out a sob. I pulled the bikes off each other. Jamie's, then Emma's, then Lillian's, then Mike's, and uncovered their bodies in the same order. It was a horrific sight. Their bodies were twisted up and rotted out. Jamie's leg was stretched out behind him at an impossible angle. Emma's shoulder had been dislocated to the point that I could see bone. Their hair was matted red with blood. Mike's head was caved in. His brains spilled out into his wife's chest. As far as I could tell, Lillian was not injured at all. And then I lifted up her wrist. Their bodies were so decayed that maggots were crawling in and out and flies landed with abandon. They must have been here for weeks. Gone over the hill one by one, all except Lillian. Was it the first time I heard those brakes that were not brakes? The second? I don't know. Does it matter? I laughed when I thought they were brakes. God help me. Now I hear them every day. Hey guys, Mark here. I, had a question regarding some sleep-related incidents. I noticed this form was called NOSLEEP, so I was thinking that this might be a form for sleep-related issues. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I really want to try and get as many professional opinions on this matter. Or, well, any words of comfort. Me and Rick have been together for a year now, and ever since we moved into the old house near Colorado Springs, something peculiar and honestly kinda terrifying has been happening. I really don't know what to make of it, so I'll just get to the meat of my problem. My boyfriend smiles while he sleeps. I don't mean like a gentle curl of the lips. I mean, his eyes are wide open and he has a massive grin from one side of his face to the other, and sometimes he breathes heavily or faintly laughs. During this time, he never blinks. The first time this occurred, I had gotten home late from work and went straight to bed. We had been in this house for less than a month, and the house is at least a century old. I had a pretty late shift and wasn't really all that tired. It was a fairly sleepless night for me, so when I tossed and rolled over to face my partner's side, I nearly jumped out of my skin. He was staring at me, his chest rising and falling, and his face was in a contorted sneer. I thought he was just being dumb, so after I took a minute to settle and relax, I let him know he got me good. Only, he didn't respond, just kept, staring and smiling. I talked to him about it the next morning and he was confused. He didn't know what I was talking about and had said he had never had complaints regarding that specific issue before. I believe him. The following night, I went to sleep again and woke up in the middle of the night to what I thought sounded like scurrying across the room. I followed the sound until I was face to face with two bright eyes and a very toothy grin. Needless to say, it was a very sleepless night as well. The next day, I said that we should put pillows between us while we sleep. He happily obliged, but seemed distant for some reason. I really didn't want to press him any further. This was a very uncomfortable discussion, and I think he knew that neither of us really wanted to talk about it. That night, I went to sleep and again woke up to the same scurrying sound that I heard the night prior. I thought I caught a glimpse of a shadow glide across the room, but I dismissed this as a REM-breaking hallucination. What I will not chalk up to as being a hallucination is that I saw Rick staring at me, his eyes peering over the wall of pillows. I begged him to wake up, even slapped his face, but he never responded. I pulled my covers over my face and tried my best to fall asleep, even let out a few prayers. If it means anything, I am an atheist. I was going to get to the bottom of what was occurring, and the next night, I charged my phone and placed it against my bedside drawer, pointing it at both of us. I wanted to know what happened and when, so I could maybe call a doctor and give him correct info for a proper diagnosis. I slept to the best of my ability, waking up to hear the scratching, but refusing to turn around to see my partner's side. I was going to pretend like I didn't know, like everything I had imagined was just a bad nightmare. In the morning, I brought up the phone recording to my partner and he refused to watch it, but he wanted me to tell him what I saw. I began the clip. Unsurprisingly, the phone actually hit the floor within the first few minutes, I suppose I did a poor job of setting it up against the bedstand. There wasn't any audio, so I decided to fast forward. I wish I hadn't. 2 hours into the recording, I saw two impossible wide eyes looking over the side of the bed. A wide grin covering the starer's face. Blood veins near bursting into the whites of the eyes. It was me. I was staring at the camera. And as soon as I had finished fast forwarding, my hand emerged over the side of the bed and waved. I chucked my phone across the room, nearly screaming. I refused to tell Rick what had happened, but he told me solemnly that he already knew. He didn't want to tell me because he thought I'd be too freaked out and would want to leave. I hadn't slept for 2 days since. When I was 11 years old, I experienced something that changed me forever, and to this day, the cops never believe me. But I know what I saw. And 9 years later, it's about time I face it again. It was a normal day in my hometown. It was a very small town that wasn't on most maps, mainly because of things that happen here. I woke up bright and early and made my way across the silent house to the bathroom. "What are you doing, Lorena?" my older sister asked, barging into the bathroom. I rolled my eyes. In my opinion, my sister Leia took all the pretty genetics and didn't leave any for me. She had beautiful dark and wavy hair that complemented her dark brown eyes and tan skin perfectly. Her nose upturned just enough to make the rest of the girls hate her. But she had a heart of gold, which made them hate her even more. I just need extra time to get ready for picture day. I sighed, pulling my brush off the shelf. She sighed. "Well, I'm gonna take a shower. Do you need a ride to school?" She began to take her clothes off. We were close like that. "Yeah, it will probably be better for me to ride with you instead of Mom. She'd probably try to make me change my outfit 400 times. We both laughed before beginning our days. Later, a knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I left my cereal behind to look through the peephole. To no avail, it seemed whoever it was had their finger pressed against the other side, preventing me from seeing them. "Hello there." 3 loud bangs caused me to stumble back from the door. With my heart in my hands, I ran up the stairs. Leia was standing in the hallway when I reached the top of the stairs. "What the fuck was that?" she asked after assessing my feared expression, clutching her towel. "I don't know. They were blocking the peephole. I think he saw me." I cried and threw myself in her arms. "It's okay." She squeezed me tightly until I calmed down. She furrowed her eyebrows and went into her room. I followed. She dropped her towel and threw on a black, oversized t-shirt and shorts. "There's always some weird shit going on in this town," she mumbled as I followed her to my parents' door. She turned and looked at me, her eyes falling on the necklace my mother gave me when I was 8. It was a large, sparkling black gem, surrounded by a silver chain. It was weird, and people made fun of me, but my mom's feelings mattered more to me, and she worked very hard to make it. "It's too damn early," my mom said, swinging the door open, her tight curls in a mess. From the darker skin to the big brown eyes, I looked like my mom. More like an awkward version though. The 3 bangs erupted from downstairs again, and my dad entered the scene. "Who's banging on the door like that?" he asked, looking to my mother. "Go get Marizzle." She nodded and made her way to my little sister's room. My dad grabbed his gun and made his way downstairs. The banging had become more persistent. Leia grabbed my hand and went into my sister's room with my mom. "You guys are really scaring me," she said. "Why did Dad automatically grab his gun?" "Gun?" Marizzle exclaimed, all her sleepiness disappearing. "Just lock the door behind me," my mom replied, then pulled me to the side, crouching to my height. "What's about to happen to us will be merciful compared to what will happen to you if you don't keep that necklace on," she said, her voice stern but low. "What do you mean? What's about to happen to you?" I asked, not realizing how loud my voice was, a lump forming in my throat. She shot a look at Leia before leaving the room. Leia locked it behind her. "What are you doing?" I yanked her back from the door by her arm. "What if they're in danger?" I asked, blood pounding in my ears. But she didn't answer me. "Leia." "I'm sorry, but I can't tell you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "But you need to stay quiet." I groaned in frustration and looked out the window. No one was standing on the porch, and the front door was left ajar. "That's weird," I quietly said to myself. Something extremely bizarre was going on. Something that Leia knew about and wouldn't tell me. And Marizzle just thought we were playing a fun game. "Lorena, Lorena, Lorena, come here." Before Leia could stop me, I unlocked the door and ran into the direction of my mother's voice. When I reached the kitchen, a noise erupted from my throat. A noise of pure fear and anguish. As my eyes fell upon my father's body, his eyes still open, the other one with a knife stuck in it. Blood pooled around him, more blood than my child mind could comprehend. My mother was nowhere in sight, which made me more frightened than usual. "Hello there," I heard right next to my ear. I spun around, but saw nothing. Tears flowing from my eyes, blurring my vision. I stumbled up the stairs as quickly as I could. "Hello there, hello there, hello there." I covered my ears, running down the hallway. "Leia," I cried, going back to Marizzle's room. There my mother was, covered in blood, another knife in her hand, her back toward me. Leia and Marizzle were nowhere to be found. "Mom?" My voice cracked. "Mom? What's going on?" I asked when she didn't respond or turn around. I walked up to her. "Mom?" I asked, spinning her around. "Hello there." She giggled before pouncing on me. I screamed, holding her knife hand back. "Mom, what are you doing?" I screamed and struggled. I wouldn't be able to fight her off for long. "Leia, Marie," I screamed, tears still flowing from my eyes. "Daddy." The knife was extremely close to my eye. There was a flash and a horrifically loud bang, leaving my ears ringing. My mother's face was gone. I screamed again and pushed her off of me. "What the fuck, Leia?" I cried, She threw the gun on the ground at my feet. There's something that's after every woman in our bloodline, and only the second-born daughter can survive from it, she said, her eyes rolling like she was fighting to stay awake. Mom didn't know until she had given birth to Marissa. No matter what you do, don't trust anyone, including me. What? Why? Somehow I knew she wouldn't answer. Her eyes were all white now, the veins in her arms slowly becoming more visible. I looked at my mom's body. I noticed the veins were protruding from her arms to an uncomfortable point. I took a blanket from Marissa's bed and laid it on my mother. "Leia?" I said, cautiously stepping forward, and she stood there, the veins in her legs doing the same thing. "Leia, where's Marie?" Still no answer. I grabbed the gun and passed her on the way out of the room. I needed to find Marie. I walked into my parents' room. Marie laid there on the bed, motionless. I walked up to her and gasped. Red fingerprints on the skin of her neck. "Marie?" I shook her. She was only a couple years younger than me. I couldn't outlive her. I grabbed my dad's phone off the dresser and dialed 911. 911? What's the location of your emergency? After giving her my address, I heard my parents' door creak open. I slowly lowered the phone, dreading turning around. Leia leaned against a doorframe, smiling. "You have a very clever mother," she said, but it didn't sound like her at all. I just stared at her. "She charmed that thing on your neck to keep me away." The more she spoke, the scarier her voice got. Whatever it was failing to mimic Leia. "What did you do to Leia?" I asked, a cold shiver going up my spine. It fixed Leia's mouth into a smile, her new set of teeth ragged and sharp. It took a few steps forward. I raised my gun. "You wouldn't shoot your big sister, right?" It was then that it raised Leia's shirt, revealing a gash on both sides of her abdomen. I didn't notice because of the dark color of her shirt. "Take the necklace off and join them." Leia's body lunged for me, and I squeezed the trigger with all my strength. The bullet pierced her skull and sprayed its contents on the wall and fell limp. A black silhouette emerged from her body, slowly walking to stand a foot away from me. "I will come back, and that necklace won't matter when I do." Then it vanished. Red and blue lights lit up my house as I stood there. The men's voices seemed to fade as I stood there paralyzed. I looked at Leia's body. She was alive just an hour ago. Am I the only person who gets that sudden feeling that they want to go home? And I'm not talking about the feeling at a party when you've run out of social battery, or when you're on your last day of vacation and start to miss the comfort of your own bed. I'm talking about when you're sitting on the couch of your own home and that rush of anxiety smacks you in the face. Like, you're not where you're supposed to be. The feeling started for me about 6 months ago. About a year after my husband and I got married and moved into our new house. Before that, we'd been living in a quaint apartment building for quite some time, so I was over the moon for the extra space. My husband, I'll call him Jay for privacy reasons, has always been a big supporter of anything that makes me happy. When we first toured the home, I knew it was definitely the place him and I could grow old together. Beautifully designed architecture on the outside, an oversized, closed-in back patio with huge, natural light-giving windows. And my favorite feature being the sky-high vaulted ceiling that just made the whole house feel open and spacious. Lush greenery decorated the lawn, and the place looked straight out of a fairy tale's dream. The price was right in our range, and the location was less than 15 minutes from Jay's work. We immediately placed a bid on the house and moved in the following few weeks. At first, things went smoothly. I enjoyed hanging pictures and installing the bright blue curtains I had ordered. So giddy to turn this house into a home. But even with every inch smothered in decor that screamed me, it still felt like I was in a stranger's home. Another thing I should interject here is I don't have really anyone besides Jay. My childhood is extremely cloudy, with maybe 1 or 2 clear memories. I've considered therapy, but Jay insists that if my brain won't let me remember the past, there's probably something that I couldn't handle remembering and to just live in the now. But I digress. I chopped my feelings of being a foreign tourist in my own home to being a normal adjustment period. That is, until about 6 months ago, when it became less of a feeling of a transition to a feeling of fear and longing. It was almost like alarms ringing in my head, warning me and begging me to go home. Jay, do you ever get that feeling like you want to go home? I casually mentioned to him after he arrived home from work the following evening, after the weird feeling was twisting and turning in my body, like a towel being squeezed of every last drop of water. Of course, every day at work around 5, when I start missing my girl, he stated back to me, kissing my forehead with a slight smirk. "Aw, you're the sweetest," I said, boasting a big grin, but not exactly what I mean. Like when you're here. Like I don't know what it is, but this house still doesn't feel like home to me. Jay's face went flat. His smirk turned to a thin, apathetic line, and his eyebrows furrowed, cheeks speckling with splotches of red. "It's just you adjusting. I feel perfectly at home here, and I'm sorry to hear you say you don't feel the same. You overthink every little feeling that streaks across your body, and you get yourself all worked up. Seriously, just relax." Jay placed his hand on my shoulder and squeezed, just a bit too hard to be comforting, before making his way down the stairs to his self-appointed man cave. I stood frozen, shocked at his sudden mood change and mild aggression towards that subject. The only time he'd really ever gotten that way to me was when I would bring up the fog in my brain that coded my childhood memories. I once again decided it was best to go against the alert sounding off in my brain and plopped on the couch to watch TV. About 45 minutes into a light cartoon children's movie that I wasn't fully immersed into paying attention to and using more as a background noise while I scrolled through Amazon on my iPad, I suddenly felt a shock slam through my skull. I reached up, smacking my hand against the side of my head. The sensation felt like a tectonic plate shifting in my head, my ears ringing loudly, and my vision suddenly became blurred and disoriented. Before I could yell for Jay, I was thrown in a mental loop, spiraling straight into what I know now was a flashback from sometime in my early teen years. The wind is cool, but not cold. It wraps around me like a pile of leaves, like the pale red and orange clusters that danced around the street in front of me. I can smell the gas of the school bus as it drives past after letting a few other children and myself off. The crunch underneath my feet is the only noise I hear, as the other children closer to the bus stop are safely ushered inside their homes. I trudge down the seemingly endless road before me before a man about 10 years my age approaches from the still quiet scene around me. "Hey, aren't you a little young to be walking home from the bus stop by yourself?" He was about 6 foot, clean cut, wearing a gray hoodie and some Nike running shorts. Clearly in shape. He looked like a college-aged guy, and I had a cousin who had just also started college, so I stopped walking, not feeling the stranger danger I would typically feel being stopped by an adult. My mom actually just started letting me this school year. I turned 13 this summer, so I'm practically an adult at this point. I responded, crossing my arms and widening my stance to show I was not to be messed with. But instead of him appearing to be intimidated, I was met with a loud snort and chuckle as his hand smacked his mouth to try and hide the humor from being overly expressed. As I stood there being laughed at, with the wind starting to kick up and scraping of leaves on the ground around me, I began to feel the anxiety bubble in my chest, and knew in my gut it was time to walk away, or run away for that matter. I don't want to be rude, but I really need to get home. "It was nice to meet you," I said politely, glancing down at my feet to avoid his gaze, his laughing coming to a stark halt, leaving the wind as the only noise brave enough to leak around us. Sneaking a quick peek at his face, my cheeks began to burn when I saw his joyful grin he had worn while chuckling had fallen instead into a pursued grimace and furrowed brow, an empty look glazing in his eyes, lacking emotion entirely. Before I could react, he sprung forward, gripping my arm and dragging my thrashing, wiggling body along the asphalt, unable to free myself from his grip. "Please, I just want to go home," I screamed, warranting no reaction from him besides him continuing to grip my arm as we approached an old yellow Mustang. In several fluid moments, lacking the reflexes from fear and shock to escape, I was shoved into the back seat and handcuffed to the headrest of the passenger seat in front of me. Digging into an unzipped bag on the floor of the vehicle that appeared to be hastily put together, half of the contents spilling onto the ground. A murmur of words I couldn't quite make out slipped through his lips when he found what he seemed to be looking for. "Home isn't a place, darling. It's a person, and I'm your home now," he whispered into my ear before shoving a gag into my mouth and holding up a rag into my face, giving me little choice but to breathe in the fumes. My eyes became too heavy to hold before everything became dark. As the flashback came to an end, my heart racing and thumping in my chest so hard, it felt like it was a bomb about to explode. Fear and terror soaked my bones as tears flowed down my cheeks, dripping from my chin. Footsteps clomped from my right as Jay began ascending the stairs, having heard the sobbing coming from the living room. Paralyzed with fear, my husband, kidnapper, the man I had spent the majority of my years in a Stockholm Syndrome haze with, inched closer with every thump that smacked inside my rib cage. Calm down, you can't let him know." Pulling myself together, I wiped the tears from my puffy, bloodshot eyes and inhaled a deep breath, exhaling the stiffness in my muscles. Turning my head, Jay standing there with a puzzled and perplexed face, staring daggers like he could read my thoughts. I forced a giggle. Sorry to worry you, babe. You know these kid movies always get me choked up. I swear the twist always turns on my waterworks. Relief flooded his face, and a softened look painted the previous hardened tension. You're such a softie, baby girl. I'll go grab my laptop from downstairs, and we can watch the next one together. That way I can comfort you with hugs and snuggles, he said with a lightness in his voice as he stood there and smiled, waiting for me to accept his invitation. I'd love that, babe. I'll meet you back on the couch in just a few minutes. I'm going to grab us some movie snacks. I chimed back at him, following his expression closely with my eyes, praying my answer would satisfy him. His eyes lit up and his grin turned to a full-blown smile stretched across his face as he nodded and headed towards the stairs to grab his laptop. Following suit, I stood up from the couch, my legs trembling, and shakily moved to the kitchen. After hearing him settle onto the couch, I shuffled quietly back into the living room, carrying a charcuterie board I had filled with meat and cheese in case, being careful not to draw attention to my re-entry in the room. I stopped behind the couch, glancing at the image reflecting off the television of Jay looking down at his laptop, and me standing behind the couch, holding the wooden snack board. After a few minutes of suffocating silence, I cleared my throat, and just as he lifted his head and began turning in my direction, I swung the tray with a crack against the side of his skull. Tiny salami and sharp cheddar flying through the air with blood splattering around it. Immediately after, his body slumped forward, drenching his laptop in blood as he crumpled to the floor. I dialed the police, blubbering the address to the operator and begging her to hurry. He still appeared to be breathing, but clearly unconscious from the blow, and I did not want to be there for the hell that would engulf this house when he regained consciousness. The police are almost here, and after being missing for over 10 years, I'm finally going home. My family was never particularly religious. Sure, we had a few rituals here and there, but nothing too overbearing. Except when it came to her. Perhaps a small-town mystery or a scary story to keep kids in line come bedtime. The girl with the skipping rope had been part of our hometown lore for over 50 years. The rules were simple. After the sun went down, we were not to open the door if we heard a girl skipping rope outside. She would pretend to be lost and ask for her parents, but under no circumstances were we to help her. If we ignored her cries for help long enough, she would leave us alone. If you grew up with something, you come to accept it as gospel truth, no matter how implausible it may be. To me, she was nothing more than Santa's evil cousin, who would visit us every couple of years. I was around 12 when I had my first encounter with her. Almost at the cusp of my teenage years, I had decided to subvert my parents' authority and watch late-night TV. I had heard from an extremely reliable source at school that they would play reruns of all my favorite shows at 12 a.m. Besides, it was a Friday night, and I didn't have to get up early. My parents had tucked me in and were out in the kitchen wrapping up dinner. I waited patiently, staring at the light at the threshold of my door. The dishwasher started running, and soon enough, the lights turned off. Tiptoeing my way across the living room, I made myself comfortable in front of the TV. I had to increase the volume just enough to not arouse suspicion, It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it. Clank. I froze. I thought I had been busted. Dad must have opened his door and found me. Clank. I turned around, but he wasn't there. Clank. Soon enough, I heard hush knocks on the door. I knew enough not to open it. Mom had drilled that into me, yet something about the sound drew me to it. I just had to see her. I struggled, but eventually decided to look out the window to see who this girl was. I was pulling the curtains when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I was about to scream, but a hand was on my mouth. "What the hell are you doing? Shut up and don't move." It was my dad. He had heard the TV and spotted me next to the door. He slowly pulled me back and carried me to my room, but not before I was able to see her. I couldn't make out much. Her black hair was covering her face and her eyes were pointed at the ground. She was dressed in white, but was covered completely in mud and dirt. She just stood there with her rope, waiting at the door. "What is wrong with you, Aaron? Have you lost your damn mind? Stay here. Let me get your mother." I knew I had messed up. Mom was going to kill me. She came in and started frantically pacing around the room. She didn't open the door. I caught her in time. My dad said, "No, you don't understand. Being near her is enough of a curse. We are fucked." That was one of the few times I heard my mom curse. After what felt like an hour of yelling, I was told to go into my room. I was grounded for a week. In that week, Father Brown stopped by to bless the house. Mom and Dad became extremely reserved around me. You'd think I shot the family dog. Over the course of the next month, there were rumors that she was visiting the town again. Behaviors radically changed. What was once a bustling community was now at a standstill. Lights would be out by 9 p.m. Kids were not allowed to stay out after dark. Church was packed every Saturday. All of this seemed performative to me until Mark disappeared. Mark had been one of my closest friends at school, and I told him about my encounter multiple times. I knew he wasn't stupid enough to open the door. The police treated it as a missing case, but we all knew what had happened. I was an inconsolable mess for the rest of the year. Needless to say, I didn't ever stay up late again. Mark wasn't the only one, however. Next it was Mr. Paul, who lived by the river. Then Miss Wu, who ran our town bakery. Finally, a little girl named Julia disappeared from her mom's house. The police didn't know what to make of this. There were no clues to any of the disappearances. The doors were opened voluntarily. There were no signs of forced entry. The victims had seemed normal until their disappearance. No leads were ever found. Everyone stayed extremely vigilant. Parents would sleep with their kids with a shotgun next to the bed. Over the next year or two, the fear died down. No one really spoke about the disappearances or the girl, although it was always a lingering thought for most people in town. A good amount of people moved, and the state decided more resources and personnel to our city. With the band-aid of time, things got better. 4 years later, they found Miss Wu's body in the forest. From what they could make of the corpse, She had been choked to death with a metal object. Her face was brutally caved in, and her skull had significant blunt force trauma. By this point, however, she was nothing more than a footprint in the newspaper. Eventually, I moved to the city. The girl with the skipping rope would pop up in my nightmares here and there. But besides that, I never paid much attention to her. Life was busy and I wanted to move on from my small town. I turned 40 last year. Now with a daughter of my own, I realized that my parents did their best to protect me my whole life. Perhaps it was this thought that led to the events of last night. "Mom, someone is at the door." My daughter startled me awake. It was 8 p.m., and it looked like I had fallen asleep on the couch. I got up to investigate. Clank, clank, clank. My blood ran cold, and it felt like my legs were giving out. I picked up my daughter and locked her in her room. 29 years. 29 years had gone by. I didn't believe this was happening. I was probably in one of my nightmares. Clank, clank, clank. I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I was the scared child caught watching TV in the living room. The same force that compelled me to let her in all those years ago came back much stronger. I was able to gather myself and turn around to go to the room. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of her from the window. The same dirty white clothes, the same black hair, except this time, she was staring right at me, her eyes piercing through my soul. She smiled at me and beckoned me to let her in. I decided to run, but before I knew it, I was in the forest being pulled by my neck, 1,000 little knives being dragged across my back. The legends got one thing wrong. The sound was not her skipping rope. She had always been holding a long metal chain, and now she was going to kill me with it. I struggled and tried to break free from the noose around my neck. I heard her laugh at my efforts. Please let me go. I have a daughter." I struggled to get the words out. Fueled by my adrenaline, I pulled the chain forward to where I could catch my breath. I snuck out from under that chain and ran. I ran as fast as I could across the forest, but I could hear her following me. Someone spotted me by the highway and called the police. At the hospital, I tried to explain the girl with the chain who tried to kill me, yet no one would believe me. Temporary psychosis, I believe they called it. The doctors theorized that I tried to harm myself and I was committed for 7 days. My daughter has since been staying with my mom, and I can breathe a sigh of relief, because I know the girl will be waiting for me when I get out. There are a few rules a Hooters girl must never forget. Hair and makeup. Entertain the men. Don't make the woman jealous. Don't wear the uniform out of the store. And never leave the restaurant alone. That last one, that was to protect the girls from the creeps. It was a great job. The customers loved you. The tips flowed like hot sauce. And the days were just one long party. Great, except for the managers. These assholes thought they were the gods of their own harems. They would expect you to worship the ground they walk on, while they told you you put on 3 pounds. Look at this picture we took at the interview. This is who we hired. If you are not her, then you don't have a job here, was the kind of shit they said all the time. Some girls who did have trouble dropping the weight sometimes had to do gross things to keep their jobs. Not me though. God granted me with a metabolism where I could eat 12 wings a day on the house, and then just dance it off every dinner rush. Things were great, until we got a new regular. He called himself Mr. Barrett, wore a bowler hat, a striped vest, and an obnoxious gold belt buckle. He had a long mustache, spoke with a hard-to-place European accent, and always paid in cash. At first, Barrett was the most popular customer in the house. He came in during slow hours, and his tips were sometimes bigger than the check. He never complained, and never tried to touch the girls, but still, instead of fighting for him, most waitresses tried to dodge his table. It was the conversation he insisted on. It got, well, personal. Not like those guys who would ask you your cup size, or if the carpets matched the drapes. Barrett would ask you why we did this job, and never took a lie for an answer. In the time you did the Hooters greeting and took his order, he could break through your mental defenses in a way 3 psychologists over 5 years of bi-weekly appointments failed to do for me. After throwing his order in the kitchen, I had to run into the bathroom sobbing and then fix my makeup. That night I had cried about my father walking out on my mother in a way I had never done before. It felt like someone grabbed my old scabbed wounds and tore them open to bleed anew. And I got a $50 tip for 1 plate of wings. The managers, on the other hand, seemed to love him. I think they had instinct to kiss up to money. And from Barrett's watch to his car, this man radiated wealth. They took every opportunity they could to stop by the table, say hello, or somehow engage in conversation. It was like being rich was contagious, and they just needed to catch the bug. Then the Dylan and Kelly thing happened, and the weird customer became a side problem. Kelly claimed Dylan, our assistant manager, forced her to do stuff she didn't want to keep her job. Police said there was no sign of force, and corporate just started dragging their feet. Everyone pretty much took it like doing stuff with management was cost of doing business. Things were escalating. Girls were talking about striking. Management was getting only more obnoxious and telling us we could be replaced at the drop of a hat. If we didn't like being here, we could just leave. Then there was the incident. Dylan had a flat tire on the highway, driver's side. He decided to change it himself and pull over to the side of the road. What happened next was reconstructed by forensics. They said a truck drove by too close and caught his suit jacket on the rear underguard. The driver could not see him. They estimated his death to be about 3 miles down the highway. Dylan was dragged as the road belt sanded him alive, breaking his bones and tearing off his limbs. Finally, he was fed into the wheel well, where he was crushed repeatedly, reduced to a pace spread across 500 feet in 3 lanes. No one knew what to think. Some people were horrified. Some people thought he got exactly what he deserved. Then Kelly called me in the middle of the night sobbing and asked me to come meet her at a local bar for closing drinks. We weren't friends. I had never seen Kelly out of uniform before. In jeans and a leather jacket, she just looked like a young woman, and not some sort of sex entertainer. I just can't do it, she sobbed, as soon as I got our drinks. You can't do what? Dylan is dead. What else is there to do? I promise. I promised Mr. Barrett. What? What are you talking about? I told Mr. Barrett. I told him I wanted that motherfucker to suffer and die. And in return, I had to call my best friend's wife and tell her we had been sleeping together all these years. What happened to Dylan was an accident. You did not cause that. You do not owe anyone anything. I haven't. I swear. She cried into her drink. 3 years of marriage. They have a kid together. I can't do that to him. To any of them. You do not have to do anything. I stood up and hugged her. I understand you feel somehow responsible, but you are not. What happened to Dylan was not your fault. Whatever deal you think you made, it's not real. That was the last time I saw Kelly. It happened on a different shift. She walked into the kitchen, tripped and fell face first into the fryer. 2nd-degree burns. Loss of vision in one eye. No longer fit to be a Hooters girl. Everyone wanted to blame the management as some sort of retaliation. The case was pretty cut and dry though. Security cameras showed no one was even close to her. She just took a bad step, and that was it. 2 days after that settled down, I had the Mr. Barrett table. I did what I could to avoid it, but we were low staff. You know it's all your fault, he said to me calmly as I tried to force a smile to take his order. What? I asked, caught off balance, no matter how much I mentally braced myself for his exchange. Kelly, if she would have done it, if you didn't interfere. I don't have time for this. I broke character. What do you want? Mike and Becky are still together. You did this. Someone owes me. I don't owe you anything. I must have been loud enough for half the Hooters to hear. Tell me if you want fucking wings, or get the fuck out of the restaurant. That's not very ladylike of you. Where is that Hooters hospitality? Why don't you sit next to me, and let me tell you what I want. I caught the manager's eye looking right at me. I put my smile back on, covered my soul with every shield my mind had, and sat down next to Barrett. So what is it you want, honey? Your mother's cancer. I literally bit my tongue. I had to listen to this bullshit or quit my job on the spot. I want to know what you want. Do you want it to go into remission for 10 years? Or would you like it to spread to her brain? Fuck you, I whispered, still smiling. You can go on vacation with her this summer, or you can be making funeral arrangements in 3 weeks. And what a 3 weeks that is going to be. If the tumor finds its way to the pain center, even morphine and sedation does nothing to relieve the agony. He looked at me and I was crying. I want you to call the number on the placemat and tell the woman that will pick up you want her husband to pay for the abortion. You are going to tell her that you meet him every Thursday when he goes to poker. He has not been losing more money lately. That's him paying for the dates. But now he won't pay for your abortion. You will do your best to convince her of your lie and not mention anything that may lead her to think you were manipulated. I will also have my usual wings. I think you know I like them Diablo. It was 2 hours later, 2 hours after I made the call. I ruined 3 strangers' lives to give someone I loved a decade to live. Please don't ask me why I believed him. I saw the choppy black and white footage of Kelly tripping on thin air and going into the fire. I know she was upset, and I know she may have been drunk, but I saw her. I saw her grabbing at her face and silently screaming as the asshole managers showing us the footage laughed and mimicked her motions. making fake yelling sounds. Dylan and Kelly were just demonstration. The door rang, and without checking the peephole, I let a man in. He had a gun he was pulling out of his jacket, and I didn't doubt his identity. "Why did you do it?" he yelled, pointing the barrel right at me. "Is it to buy drugs? Was it just a crazy coincidence that I got another woman pregnant in the past?" He threw a few hundreds on the table. "Here's your fucking money. Now tell me why." "Yes, I needed money to buy drugs," I said softly. "She won't even listen to me. This is the one thing she won't even listen to me about." "How did you know?" "Even Kelly didn't know about that." "Tell me one fucking reason I should not shoot you." "I didn't know anything. I needed money and I got the number from Kelly. If you want to shoot me, shoot me. I don't care." It must have been the bland apathy in my voice that got him. He put down the gun on the table next to the money. "You are not worth this. If you have any decency, you should blow your own brains out. I am not going to prison for you. Sell the gun to buy more drugs. I don't care." There is a rule at Hooters. Girls can't leave the restaurant alone. It's there to protect the staff, not the customers. No one expects a psycho waitress to follow one out to his Lamborghini and empty a revolver at point blank at the driver. I probably did more damage to that car than the combination of all cars I would own in my lifetime. I didn't hit Mr. Barrett once. Maybe I was a bad shot, or maybe he was too good at being a target. I was not even officially fired. I left in handcuffs with bail higher than anyone I knew could afford. I was charged with attempt murder and thrown into the gears of the system. With my mother's money being gone to cancer treatments, I had nothing but a public defender. There were witnesses from the staff and patrons of the restaurant, but Mr. Barrett never took the stand. I never said a word about his involvement with Dylan's death. I got 15 years. Prison is its own den, filled with its own monsters. I may tell those stories some other day, but not here. What was important here is that 3 weeks after I was moved into federal, there was a Mr. Barrett there to see me. I knew without a doubt that if I talked to him, did what he wanted, I would be out of this hell within the week, if not the day. I refused to see him. He never tried again. I got out on parole in exactly 10 years for being a model prisoner. I think they also felt sorry for me, as this was exactly the week my mother's cancer came back. It was exactly like Mr. Barrett said it would be. The tumor spread to her brain. The joke was on him though. 10 years of medical research changed a death sentence to a manageable surgery. I moved in with her, and somehow after everything that happened, we were closer than ever before. I have held this story hidden in my heart until my mother's passing. Mr. Barrett, that man, he must have literally been the devil. The only power we have over him is to refuse him. That is what scares me, that at one point in my life, I will want something hard enough that Mr. Barrett finds me again. I am not afraid of the monsters in the world. I am afraid of the monsters in myself. What could I be to do with the right motivation? How many people would I let get hurt to get what I want? I feel bad about it, but what is that worth? Are Mike and Becky having better lives because I overdosed once, trying to take my own life? No. Self-pity is just another path into his arms. I must live with who I am, and who I could be, and I must never forget what darkness lurks just under the smiles of mankind. Shout out to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Casey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I really look forward to making more content for everyone.